So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage Ian Coldwater. She is starting a new gig that she'll tell you all about, which is pretty awesome. And she is also very involved in Kubernetes, a troublemaker. Can I say troublemaker du jour? Would that be okay? She said troublemaker. I got to throw something onto it. So troublemaker, and also helps with, runs the Girls Taking Over CTF team. So again, it is my pleasure, and please welcome to the stage Ian Coldwater.
When does the... Oh my goodness. Hi, everybody. Hi. This is an amazing space. Can we just take a second before I start to thank the organizers and the amazing AV crew for putting this on, having us all here? This is really exciting, and thank y'all so much for being here, too. Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Coldwater. That thing is very big. And I'm an independent security consultant from Minneapolis. I'm independent for another 9 days, and then I start my new gig at Heroku, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to be pen testing all the container infrastructure there. And one thing that I do is I travel around the country and I speak a lot. I speak a lot to DevOps audiences about how to secure their Kubernetes installations, and I speak to security audiences about how to break the DevOps people's security installations. And one of the cool things about getting to do that is that I get to talk to a lot of different people from both of those communities. And I get to see the kinds of things that they say about each other, about their pain points, what their learnings are, what their understandings are, like, you know, what they're thinking. And I've found some commonalities and some differences. So I wanted to take that sum of knowledge and bring it to you and talk about it and talk about how we can come to work better together. And apparently I clicked this without looking. So what this is all about is, yeah, like I said, these communities have common interests, but they're not always necessarily connected very well to one another. And this causes various kinds of problems. There's gaps in communication, gaps in knowledge, gaps in understanding. And this creates both interpersonal problems and problems in the security of software and the products that we build. So let's talk about how we got to this place, what we can do to move forward. So first things first. Just want to put some things on the table before we go there. Everything that I'm saying is pretty much bullshit. The dichotomy between DevOps and security is false. It has to be. Because it's all part of the same pipeline, right? Ideally, we're all working together. We're all working toward the same goals. We want to build more secure stuff. I mean, those of us who want to break stuff, fair enough. But ideally, that's what we want to be doing. And there's overlap there. The existence of DevSecOps people like me, proves that overlap. And we know that it shouldn't be this way. So there's that. But the pain points are real. People have a hard time communicating. People don't understand what's going on. This causes problems on either side of the news cycle. And I want to acknowledge that. These silos exist because acknowledging a problem is the first step to try to start to fix it. Because silos are for grain. And it doesn't have to be this way. I think we can think about this as a security vulnerability, because it causes security vulnerabilities. So if we're naming this one today, and yes, I realize that's not a number, let's figure out, let's treat it like a vulnerability. Let's do an analysis of it. Let's figure out how to remediate it. As security people, how many folks here have done a pen test, either extracurricularly or otherwise? A few of y'all. A lot of us who work as pen testers know that a lot of the stuff we see in the wild isn't the sexy O-days that we all really like to talk about. Those are fun, but mostly what we see is things like defaults and misconfigurations. We see them a lot. We see admin. We see people leaving their SMB1 open. We see all these things. And it's easy to patch a bug in software. You fix the code, you patch in whatever way makes sense in your organization, and then you're good. You're patched for the moment. The thing is that misconfigurations are harder to patch, because misconfigurations don't come from bugs in code. They come from things like misunderstandings and miscommunication. And you can't patch culture, but you can improve it. So let's talk about how to do that. First, let's talk about how they got here, or how we got here. How did these flaws come to be? It's complicated, right? There's a combination of factors, and I'm probably going to miss some, but let's talk about a few. Let's talk about DevOps. And I was like, this was ugly on a small screen, so it has to be real ugly on this big one. So I come from DevOps. I was a DevOps person before I did DevSecOps, before I went into security. DevOps, we're amazing. We do amazing things. We move as fast as we possibly can. We improve efficiency. We, move everything forward. We manage to do the jobs of 10 people because we automate so much of it that we can. That's awesome. We move fast. We get stuff done. That's great. But the problem is that moving fast isn't always necessarily a good thing. Security can be an afterthought, or it can be seen as a blocker. Has anyone here read the Phoenix Project? A couple of y'all? So people who have read this are going to have heard it before. And I'm going to move this water not to the back of this thing. So the Phoenix Project is, everybody hear me? A sort of thinly veiled editorial disguised as a novel. And in the Phoenix Project, which is this allegory of a business that's kind of failing, people aren't getting along, there's a lot of issues and silos between development and operations, and nobody's getting anything done. Eventually, they figure out how to get development and operations to work together, and that goes great. Everybody lives happily ever after, except there's one villain in this book, and that villain is the security guy in the company. And he is the one character who never gets redeemed. At the end, when dev and ops become DevOps, everybody works together, this is fantastic. The security guy is still widely disliked, still is off in his silo in the corner, and as the other silos break down, that one stays intact. Now, the Phoenix Project, why I'm mentioning this, is considered one of the sort of seminal works of the beginnings of the cultural idea of DevOps. People really like this. When you get your first DevOps job, somebody gives you a copy of the Phoenix Project. And the fact that it's considered so important, which it is, historically it's very important, the fact that it is important and the relationship with the security person is so bad, I think is indicative of DevOps and security's relationship in a way that kind of sucks. We don't actually want it to be like that. And you can see this also in the way that people communicate across teams in organizations sometimes, or even the ways that individuals communicate or communities communicate. It's people, if security is seen as a blocker, if they're seen as the team of no, it doesn't necessarily make people want to work with us. And if developers are we're just going to do all of our features, get our sprint done, and then throw it over the wall, maybe they're not throwing it over the wall to ops anymore, but as security, maybe they're still throwing it to us. And that's a bummer on our end, too. So we need to figure out how to work better across teams and across communities. In our excitement, in our speed, DevOps, and I'm saying we here because I come from there, we can miss things. And we can fail to make our work legible. People don't necessarily understand what we're doing. And the lack of transfer of knowledge can create problems on any number of sides. Pete Cheslock is responsible for this graphic. Thank you, Pete. And DevOps, shiny rainbow unicorns, sometimes can create problems for security in our moving so quickly and maybe not taking security into consideration in the process. The name of the book that people get when they learn Kubernetes often is called Kubernetes Up and Running. Kubernetes Up and Running is a fantastic book. And its name is kind of like what it says on the tin. It's getting it done. It's getting it open, getting your cluster spun up. And the defaults are pretty open. And it's open because you want to get up and running. You want to get going. You want to get your thing on. But then you can look on Shodan, and you can see a lot of the sort of results of that of like leaving open defaults to just like get it done fast. And yeah, you get it done, but you don't necessarily get it secure. And if you don't secure it when you're making it, it becomes a lot harder to add security later rather than building security into the process. Some would argue that some knowledge didn't get transferred to DevOps either. So if DevOps is failing to communicate what we're doing to security folks and being, moving so quickly, getting this stuff done that security is really struggling to keep up, which sometimes it is, but maybe security folks haven't necessarily been communicating our stuff very well to DevOps either. One thing that I see a lot as a container person is like people being like, what do you mean that's exposed to the internet? We learned this as like LAMP stack developers in 2003. What is the deal? I don't understand. And this comes from this. There are reasons for this. A lot of like older school, like graybeard Unix sysadmins, who are awesome for the older school graybeard Unix sysadmins in the room, have a lot of accumulated knowledge over time, which is really important and really useful. And some number of older school sysadmins have a lot of feelings about DevOps for reasons that are totally valid and haven't necessarily communicated the sum total of their accumulated knowledge to the DevOps folks in their midst. And DevOps people, in our enthusiasm, in our excitement, in our moving quickly, have not necessarily taken the accumulated sum of knowledge into account or put it into our products. And so on the one hand, you have people who are like really excited, moving really fast, and on the other hand, we're making the same mistakes over and over. But the people who have learned not to make those mistakes aren't necessarily telling the people who are continuing to make those mistakes now. They're just complaining, which, fair enough, but also isn't necessarily productive. So one thing we can do besides complain is try to talk to the people who are creating the security holes in the new software and try to explain to them what we know. Not by being like, your stuff's insecure, this sucks. Because who wants to hear that? For one thing, it's a bummer. Like you hear that your work is bad. And for another thing, it's not really actionable feedback. Like, okay, it's insecure. What do I do about it? And being like, okay, your stuff's insecure, here's why, here's how you can fix it, might be a better way to try to communicate that when we're communicating. Because here's the thing that might be happening too, is InfoSec as a community tends to have, as I said, also a lot of sum of accumulative knowledge. But a lot of the stuff that a lot of folks are talking about still is not necessarily reflective of a lot of the work that like cloud native and DevOps and container folks are doing. And cloud native and DevOps and container folks are doing really amazing stuff with new tech. Like modern tech stacks are really cool. But what's happening is that they're moving so quickly in terms of what they're making that they're going zoom way up here, and kind of InfoSec is kind of going like that, and learning it much more slowly. And a lot of the time this works fine, actually, until it doesn't. Who here's taken the OSCP? Anybody? A few of y'all? When I went through the OSCP lab classes, I was like, this is so old. Like, who works with this stuff? Like, this is ancient. At one point, I had to compile a kernel from 2004. And was kind of scandalized by it until I started working in InfoSec and realized that InfoSec lives in 2010. And this is OK, kind of, because as pen testers, we're still dealing with XP. But, it works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, this becomes a problem. This speed of movement and this increasingly large divide with this trajectory means that in the future, InfoSec is in danger of not having the knowledge that we need to be able to secure modern software. And if security becomes irrelevant, does software become more secure? I'm going to argue not. I don't think so. And so I think it's on us as InfoSec to be keeping up with what is happening in the modern tech world, with the new technology, with cloud, with DevOps, with the really cool stuff that people are coming up with. And as DevOps container cloud native people, it's on us to be explaining what we're doing. Because we're not always good at that, like at all. Who here's ever written documentation or read it? Really? Like 5 of you? For real? OK. So for anybody who's ever written or read documentation, sometimes it's really bad. And sometimes it doesn't exist. And a lot of us are responsible for that. Writing documentation isn't fun. I get it. And in DevOps, things move so quickly that sometimes we just don't bother. Or it's like already it's already outdated by the time we've written it, and so just like screw it. But the thing is, if we're not explaining what we're doing to people, how are people going to know what we're doing? And so if there are DevOps people in the room, it's important for us to be able to make our work legible. Like I said, be able to explain what it is that we're up to. Because and I think that security is moving forward in its understanding of DevOps and cloud tech, but it's pretty slow. And there are some things that I'll move slides because you've been looking at this one for a while. Security. It's one thing that is that happens with that is that our understandings as security people break with some modern tech. Frameworks break. Our understandings of how to patch things, what a system looks like, what a stable system looks like, how to fix it, kind of break with ephemeral compute, kind of break with containers, with some of the ways that understandings of network perimeter don't really make any sense in a multi-cloud tenant environment in which everything is API-based. They just don't necessarily. And if security isn't taking our ideas, our understandings, and our frameworks and continuing to move them forward, then it's just going to continue to not work as well. And we want to be able to secure stuff, so we need to be able to do that. So let's talk about the security community for a minute, because I talked about DevOps. So security people tend to be a little more paranoid than DevOps people, for pretty solid reasons. DevOps people tend to assume good. Security people don't necessarily. I can't imagine why. But that can affect not only the ways that we approach software, where I gave this talk, or a version of this talk, to an audience of developers and suggested that maybe they write evil user stories in their agile user stories, that they have an evil user persona for an attacker, and this really blew their mind. They were like, whoa. And I didn't expect that to be the line that made the most impact, but whatever works. A lot of them it doesn't occur to them to think about ways that things could be misused. And those of us who misuse things for a living, we get to think about how things could get misused a lot. So, there's a little bit of a difference there in mindset, in approach. And that can not only affect the way that we approach building things, but it can also affect the feel of communities themselves. Because DevOps people tend to be pretty open. Security people, not so much. We tend to be pretty insular. We're really good about sharing knowledge with each other. But we're not necessarily good about sharing knowledge with other people. And again, this can cause problems with knowledge transfer. Also, it can cause problems because security folks, people think we're jerks. Honestly, they do. It's a problem. And a lot of the time when I go to DevOps conferences, I hear things like, I wanted to work in security, but I don't know how you work with those people. They're awful. They're so toxic. They're mean to each other. They have no manners. Why? I don't know how you do it. That's terrible. We should all be ashamed of that. Because honestly, what I see of the security community is that we're amazing. We have so much knowledge. We do such cool stuff. And within the community, people are incredibly helpful to one another. Share the knowledge that we have, help people learn, help bring people up with us. That's super cool. We need to do that with other people too, outside of the security community. And there's different ways that we can do that. Yeah, so on teams across organizations, what people see, so besides conference feedback, is they see us as blockers They see us as saying no to their projects. They see us not being super nice about it, again, like not necessarily giving actionable feedback. So they're like, OK, security people, I want to work with you, in theory, but all you do is like poop on my stuff and tell me my baby is ugly. People aren't necessarily super stoked about that, so let's figure out how to talk to people better. And let's figure out how to do better, because I know how we got this way, but it isn't necessarily a good way to be. So if we know that this is a vulnerability, we understand how we got here, let's analyze it. Let's figure out what this is getting us now. What we've got here is a failure to communicate. This has caused gaps in knowledge and understanding on all sides. All of us are poorer for it. These things have happened for valid reasons, without malicious intent, but they have happened, and here we are now. So what is the impact of this CVE? Like, what happens if we leave this unpatched out in the wild? For one thing, bugs. For another thing, confusion. There was a CVE at the end of last year in Kubernetes that involved aggregated API servers. If anybody's curious as to the deep dive, I'm going to be doing it at DockerCon in a few weeks. And the way that this particular bug happened, it was both a local privilege escalation and a remote code execution bug. Security people were super confused by this. They were like, how is it possible for something to be both remote code execution and local privilege escalation? That doesn't even make any sense. And it is possible because of the way that aggregated API servers in Kubernetes work on the back end. And one way that some of this confusion could have been mitigated could have been by explaining to people how Kubernetes works on the back end, which clearly we didn't do very well because people who are like really smart people who clearly know what they're doing were confused. That's on us as DevOps people, as container people. We weren't explaining things well. And that led to fallout. It led to fallout of like weirdness around disclosure and confusion on the other end. If we were talking more on the other side of the news cycle, we could have done better with that. And what else does it cause? It causes less secure software for all. When we don't come together, those gaps leave holes. Not only holes around understandings after the fact, but holes in understanding that create bugs beforehand that could have been avoided with greater education and greater empathy. Nobody wants that, I don't think. Maybe the black hats in the room want that. Fair enough. But I'm not a black hat, so I can't speak for y'all. We can do better. It is possible. And I have faith in us. So how can these flaws get remediated? How can we get there from here? Is it DevSecOps? Maybe. The first time I gave this talk, I didn't actually use the word DevSecOps at all. And somebody was like, obviously this talks about DevSecOps. The thing is that DevSecOps is a meaningless buzzword on top of another meaningless buzzword. If anybody has tried to get a job doing DevOps, one thing you may discover is that DevOps means completely different things to completely different people. And it's really important, if you are looking for a DevOps job, to clarify exactly what it is that people mean by that. So do you mean a glorified sysadmin? Do you mean a glorified developer? Do you mean somebody who plays with CI/CD pipelines all day long? Literally, what do you mean? Because people have interpreted DevOps as being about tools, and it's not. It's about culture. It's a framework of understanding and a framework of working together. And DevSecOps, which threw another little bit into that set of buzzwords, has also been interpreted to be around tools, about shifting left, about putting security things into your CI/CD pipeline. And that's great. Everybody should be using that tooling. People should be shifting left, which shifting left is the idea of like thinking about the software development lifecycle as like a holistic thing, and then moving security into it instead of having it be that afterthought. So that instead of throwing it over the wall and having people deal with the unicorn poop, everybody's working together with this. So those tools are really important. People should be using them. They're pretty cool. But I don't think that tooling is actually going to fix the problems that we have here. What's going to fix the problems that we have here is cultural change. So let's talk about how to do that. We need to communicate better. I keep saying this, but it's true. We need to engage with each other more on this side of the news cycle. We need to reach out, and we need to get out of our bubbles. So one way that we could do that is by doing things like speaking at each other's conferences. It's OK to talk about security at non-security conferences. And in fact, I'm going to argue that it's more than OK. It's really needed, because people don't necessarily know how to do this stuff. All of us think that our knowledge is basic. The things that we do day to day are boring. Like, that's not going to be useful knowledge to anybody else. But it isn't basic to everybody. It probably isn't boring to everybody. And it really isn't stuff that everybody knows. And so if we are able to talk about these things that maybe seem simple to us, they're not necessarily going to be simple to other folks. I gave a talk about basic cross-site scripting to an audience of relatively junior JavaScript developers at one point who were totally mind blown about it. They were so excited. And all of us are like, yeah, OK, script alert 1, you know? But that isn't necessarily things that people know. And people need to know that stuff, because if they literally aren't aware that it exists, how are they going to prevent it in their software? Probably not very easily. So we can speak at each other's cons, get out of our bubbles, talk across teams more within your org, talk to other people more. Just as I said, we're insular as security people. Just try to get out more. And on the DevOps end, container folks can seem like they're speaking a different language. I hear a lot as a Kubernetes person, I see the word Kubernetes and my eyes glaze over. I have no idea what you're talking about. It's boring. I don't get it. And that's on us. We need to be explaining what we're doing, having people understand it better, and having it not look boring. So, if we're explaining to people better so that they're keeping up with us, this trajectory issue isn't necessarily going to happen as much. Maybe all the boats get to be lifted so that we're all moving at the same speed. And that's ideal. And security, like I said, talk more with other people. It's important. And be nice. I got feedback at one point that I wasn't telling developers to be nice or DevOps people to be nice, so if there are any of those in the room, y'all be nice too. But security, we do have a reputation. Let's try to transcend that, because we're better than that. I know we are. I've seen us be. So talking about people thinking that their knowledge is obvious, I went and spoke at a few different conferences last October. And I flew straight from Velocity, which is an O'Reilly conference about systems infrastructure stuff, to DerbyCon, where I did different versions of the same talk. And at Velocity, I had dinner with a bunch of incredibly brilliant engineers. And somebody brought up Kali Linux, and nobody had heard of it. Anybody here heard of Kali Linux? A couple of y'all? Everybody's giggling, right? Because that seems like pretty basic knowledge. But these people who are Kubernetes rock stars, people who just are doing incredible work, had never heard of it because they had no need to. Why would they care? And I was talking to them about how I was about to do this talk at DerbyCon, which was a talk about how to attack containers in a room of people who had largely not heard about containers or understand Kubernetes. And they were like, what do you mean they don't understand Kubernetes? Everybody understands Kubernetes. What do you mean they haven't heard of that? That doesn't make any sense. And when I went to DerbyCon, I was so I had this conversation, and they had never heard of Kali. Everybody was like, what? People have asked me this story is real. It's real. But I think it's really indicative of yeah, if you're somebody who works with Kubernetes every day, that's going to be obvious knowledge to you. If you're somebody who works with Kali every day, that's going to be obvious knowledge to you. But those things aren't necessarily shared across these streams. So let's try to build these bridges and cross those chasms, because I think that we can do that, and I think that that would help a lot. It isn't that everybody needs to have all of the knowledge, but if people have enough of the knowledge to be able to understand what's going on across teams, I think that can really help a lot. All of us, in improving communication, in improving these cultures, can bring what we're good at. Because DevOps people have things that we're really good at. Security people have things that we're really good at. So let's take the best of these communities, bring them to each other, and bring them to the world, because we can do that. Every single person in this room has something to teach and something to learn. All of us. even you, the person who doesn't think you do. And our communities are no exception. So let's take the best of what we have to offer, bring it together, combine it, and work together to build something better. DevOps principles can inspire us. DevOps as an idea, as a cultural movement, is about breaking down silos, is about approaching with empathy, is about working together better instead of building things over walls, and creating continuous improvement for all. That's awesome. We can learn from that. We can have that inspire us. And our enthusiasm, our desire to take things and run with them, to make things amazing, that's pretty awesome too. I think we can get inspired by that as well. Security isn't a blocker. Security is integral. I'm talking to an audience of security people, and so everybody knows this. But for real, our being able to think like attackers makes it possible to be able to build things with misuse cases in mind. Our ability to understand the ways that things can be broken, to find holes in things, allows people to be able to find those gaps and close them. That's awesome. We should all feel good about that. And security, we temper things. We make them stronger. And so our ability to do that can make all of us stronger. That's pretty cool. And our ability to think outside the box, it doesn't hurt for building things that can be awesome either. Because at the end of the day, all of us are on the same side. We are. The software development lifecycle is one whole. And I think most of us, again, black hats in the room accepted, want software to be more secure. So if we think of ourselves as being on the same team, as moving toward the same goals, and act accordingly, we can go far in changing the culture. And that starts with every one of us. Because together, what we build becomes stronger, and together, we become stronger. And building better relationships is the first way to do that. As I said, this starts with all of us. How can we do that? One way that we can do that is approach the people on other teams, just the individuals that we're talking to in the room, everybody with empathy. Where are they coming from? Why are they being like that? What is their deal? Because most people, developers and DevOps people, are not there to piss you off, security people. They're there to get through their sprint, to get through their day, to build a thing. Hopefully it's cool. But they're just trying to do their thing. And DevOps and developer security people, we aren't there to make you sad and shit on your projects. We're there to try to make your projects more secure. So if you just approach the person that you're talking to and try to figure out what their goals are, what it is that they're going for, that can help in trying to figure out how to be able to work with them. Because if you can figure out what they want, what it is that they're aiming for, then you can figure out how to be able to move forward with them. And so meet people where they are, and then bring them up with you. If there's knowledge that they're lacking that you have, help provide them with that knowledge. It doesn't mean you need to be a full-time teacher, but it helps with actionable feedback, and it helps create better understanding so that people aren't misconfiguring things or leaving holes in their stuff out of ignorance, because that can happen. We can break down the walls. Together, we can come up with new paradigms. We can change the culture. We, right now, are living in and building a new technological world. That's amazing. We're doing things that humans have never been able to see. We're doing things that people 150, 20, 10, 5 years ago couldn't have dreamed of. That's awesome. We should all be excited about that. And we should all conduct ourselves in a way that's worthy of it, because we're worthy of it. So let's act that way. Let's network together. Let's bridge these nodes. And let's make our work as strong as it can be. Together, we can do it for the benefit of all, and for the benefit of what we build, even the benefit of what we break. This is a pretty rainbow, and I believe in you. Thank you all very much.